We can have the slides on the... Okay, so my job here this morning, I think, is quite easy. I think I have the easiest job. We're trying to answer the question whether we are competitive. And because the room is full of entrepreneurs and business people, captains of industry, I'm sure you know the answer better than I do from your experiences. It's not an easy environment. Part of what I'll try to do this morning is simply run through some of the data. As Bernard calls it, establish a baseline for the discussion. I will draw on statistics that is in the public domain that many of you are quite familiar with already. I will also draw on statistics that our firm has collected, analysis and research that we have done. And then I'll draw a few insights to set a benchmark. And I think we have no other person better to do the keynote for us today than Mr. Otine JC, who has seen it all as far as Ghanaian business is concerned. And so the first thing I'll talk about, of course, is the question of competitiveness. Competitiveness in what? Because that's the key question. And I would look at it in three main dimensions. The first one, of course, is that you have to look at the competitiveness of the country itself. Because competitiveness of businesses doesn't exist in a vacuum. If your country is not competitive, it's extremely difficult to be competitive as a business. So we'll look at issues of enabling environment and operating environment issues. And then we'll look at the competitiveness of the businesses themselves, and we'll look at all the standard matrices that we're used to: cost, price, competitiveness, skills, quality. You're looking at business culture and a whole lot of other factors. The third one, of course, is outside of what the government does at the macro level, outside of what entrepreneurs themselves do, is also what I call culture competitiveness. The competitiveness of the culture of the people themselves is extremely important. Issues of work ethic, issues of how we view opportunities and how we deal with failure is extremely important. And of course, the question of competitiveness in relation to what? We want to look at our competitiveness in relation to how our products do perform in our own domestic markets, and competitiveness in terms of how our products perform in foreign markets. The first thing I want to look at, of course, is the macro question. And what you have on the slide is the 2018 Global Competitiveness Index. Again, many of you are fairly familiar with this. It ranks 140 countries every year in terms of how competitive they are. And if you look at Ghana's rank there, 106th over 140. The year before, we were 104, so we slipped 2 places down. It's a bit depressing. And the situation hasn't really improved over the last 20 years. Not that much. Another important indicator aside the Global Competitiveness Index, of course, is the famous Doing Business Index by the World Bank. And again, our position there, 114 over 190. And even though we like to tell ourselves that within the Africa region, we're within the top 10, and we like to say that, I think it's about time we stop comparing ourselves just in terms of how well we're doing in the African region. Because if you look on the slide, what will shock you is that Kenya is 61 in the world. Now, if Kenya is in the top 60 globally in terms of ease of doing business, there's no reason why Ghana shouldn't be in the top 60. So if you're in the top 10 in Africa, it's quite pointless, because the people who are competing with you in Africa are not just the top 10 in Africa. It's also the top 10 in the world. It's the top 20 in the world. They are all playing in the African turf. So being in the top 10 in Africa, or the top 5, or the top 2 in West Africa isn't enough. If Kenya is in the top 60 globally, top 61, There's no reason why Ghana shouldn't be in that category. So to be not in the top 100 is quite problematic. If you disaggregate this a little further down, we're talking of getting access to credit. And we all know cost of capital is one of the most unfair situations that business people and entrepreneurs have to deal with in this country. And if you look at our country's position, again, we are ranked 73 globally. Now, what will shock you again, and Kenya continues to be a fascinating case study here. Kenya is in the top 10 globally in terms of access to capital. So again, if Kenya can be number 8 globally in terms of access to capital, there's no reason why Ghana shouldn't be at least in the top 20. We're 73. And if you have to build a business, how do you do that with the kind of interest rates we have in this country? And again, this has been a situation for over 20 years, over 30 years. It just doesn't improve that much. If you look at paying taxes, again, we rank 115 globally. Well, Kenya is not too far from there, 91. We're a little above the sub-Saharan Africa average. If you look at the score, we're 66.7. The African average is 57, so we're doing quite well in that sense, but we can do much, much better. If you look at trading across borders, what it takes for Ghanaian businesses to trade across borders, move our products beyond our small local economy, again, it's extremely depressing. 156 over 190. 156. That's our ranking. So how do you build Ghanaian champions? How do you build Ghanaian multinationals if it's this difficult to move our products beyond our local borders? Resolving insolvency, and I picked this chart because often the talk has been about how easy is it to start a business, right? Now, the other thing that's extremely important is also how easy to fail as an entrepreneur. Because that's also very, very important. If you have to file for bankruptcy and go through insolvency and restructure your business, how easy it is. It's extremely difficult, and we're not doing very well on that as well. If you look at the ease of doing in business trends for Ghana in the last several years, what we have done quite well in terms of indicators, one of the key things we've improved on is the ease with which it is to start businesses in this country. That has improved a lot. But it's also important to work on ease of failing as a business. And if you look at all the troubles we've had in the banking sector in the last 2 years, it's triggered a couple of reforms in that respect. But I think one of the things we need to do, perhaps, is see how we can leverage on those experiences to make it a whole lot easier for businesses outside of the financial sector as well. So what's our situation? The reason I said my job is easier is because we knew the answer sort of from the beginning, right? We just wanted to see what the statistics is. The situation is tough. The operating environment isn't easy. It's not. And if your country is not competitive, it's very difficult to be competitive as a business, as an entrepreneur. It doesn't mean you cannot be competitive. You can, but what it means is that being competitive becomes a very expensive thing to do. So this is our situation. And the only way we can really tell whether Ghanaian businesses are competitive or not is if the operating environment eases up, if it improves. Then you can really, really measure how competitive Ghanaian entrepreneurs are. But within the current environment, it's not easy to tell, because a lot of what determines a business's competitiveness is really in the operating environment. So that's one way to tell, and it's not easy to tell because the environment isn't that good. But another way to tell this is to look at how the businesses are doing within the environment as a given, right? So here I will draw on a study that our firm did recently, and My team is in the house, and I'm sure during the break you can pick up conversations with them to have a little more insight into this study. We decided to look at the 8 biggest supermarkets in Accra and to measure how much made in Ghana products we have on the shelves if you walk into the supermarkets. And the reason we picked the supermarkets is because increasingly they are becoming a preferred retail point for a lot of Ghanaians, especially the rising middle class. But there's also something about the supermarkets that tells you a lot about the competitiveness of Ghanaian producers. Because the supermarket environment is itself a bit of a microcosm of global competition. Now, first of all, majority of the big ones are foreign-owned. And the second factor at play here is that because they are foreign-owned, they play within a network of global supply chain infrastructure and supply chains that determines, to a large extent, what products get onto their shelves. So if you are a Ghanaian producer and you are competitive and you're able to get onto the shelves of the supermarkets, it tells a lot about your competitiveness. In a way, the supermarkets are almost like a foreign economy in our domestic economy, right? And if you can break into that foreign system locally, it says a lot about how competitive you can be externally. So as an illustration, it tells us a lot about our competitiveness. When we looked at 23 product categories, and we chose the product categories carefully to reflect areas that we knew Ghanaians have some comparative advantage. So you had a lot of food products, and then outside of food products, the manufacturing products we picked were fairly basic manufacturing categories. But what we did was also to not just base it on our own it wasn't a presumptive list of where Ghanaian producers will be competitive. We did an initial baseline study that basically went through all the malls, supermarkets, and did a census count. We went shelf to shelf and looked at every category where you had made in Ghana products, and based on that, we determined what the final list to look at should be. So when I say supermarket in Accra, I'm talking of Game, ShopRite, Palace, Belcom, Maxmart. There were 8 of them. And we did this survey between May and April 2019. The initial baseline study was done in November 2018. So it's been ongoing for a while. Now, the results were not too surprising. We discovered that if you put everything together, only 18% of the products across the 23 categories are made in Ghana. So we all know that it's an import-dependent economy, and it's not too surprising. But what we found surprising was the breakdown. So with the exception of eggs and water, all the other product categories, we didn't see 50% Ghanaian made in Ghana representation. So for eggs, we had 91%, and I think some of that is just the nature of the product. It's delicate, so you better source it locally. But water was the second top made in Ghana product, 56%. And that's not too good. What it means is that 44% of the water in the supermarkets are imported. And we are talking water. Now, you zoom down the chart, and everything else is really problematic. Rice, 6%. Meat, 37%. Sugar and salt, 49%. Fish and seafood, 18%. Alcoholic drinks, that was a bit surprising, 10%. Sanitary products, 8%. Confectionaries and biscuits, 8%. Soaps and detergents, 8%. Cosmetics, beauty products, 6%. Fruits and vegetables, 33%. So something is fundamentally wrong. Something is fundamentally wrong. There's a lot more conversations we can have about what this really means. Does this mean that Ghanaian producers are not competitive? Or does it mean that they just don't get the opportunity to get their products on the shelves? Because we know there's a lot that goes into determining what ends up on the shelves. Is this also just a reflection of the bigger problem of Ghanaian preference for foreign products? Or is it the supermarkets just not working with Ghanaian producers to get more products onto the shelves? Whatever the answer, if we want to be forward-looking about this, what this is telling us is that there are certain product categories in which we should be doing way better than we are doing. It's not an issue of getting 100% in every category, but there's just certain categories that it's just unacceptable. And the question is, how do we get the scores going up? I know the FDA has recently started an initiative to produce made-in-Ghana products, to promote made-in-Ghana products in the malls. So if you go to some of the supermarkets, I think Palace and Kuala, if you go, they have shelves that are promoting made-in-Ghana, but it's more tokenistic. We should be seeing bolder efforts to get this up. So for example, can we set a target and say, we want water to get up to 70% over the next 3 years and work actively to get it up there? Fruit and vegetables, can we source more locally and get it up to maybe 60%? Alcoholic drinks, maybe up to 40%. But there's a bigger conversation here, and I'm sure that in the breakout sessions later on, as you do all the dialogue, and this will be something to pick on to establish more context. Other findings from the survey was that we were more competitive. Well, not competitive. We had more products. We had more made-in-Ghana products in basic goods versus processed goods, which again is not really news. But again, if you zoom into certain specific product categories, the situation is a bit stark. So if you take oils, for example, cooking oils, only 25% of all the cooking oils, and we cook a lot in our supermarkets, it's made in Ghana. Now, the surprising part is this: 100% of all the, what we call the red oil, the zumi, is all made in Ghana. But once you move from that to the vegetable cooking oils, 94% is imported. So, again, it's a reflection on our manufacturing and our processing capacity as a country. But again, it's revealing if you look at the data in this sense. Now, our biggest shock from the survey, because we wanted to understand some of the ingredients that may be driving competitiveness of our products in the supermarkets. So we looked at pricing, and we did a random comparison of prices between made-in-Ghana products and imported products in the supermarkets. And what we found shocking was that contrary to what we've always called the influx of cheap imports, we discovered that in 73% of the categories that we looked at, made-in-Ghana products were actually more competitive in terms of pricing. And when we saw the data at first, we couldn't believe it, so we did another count just to be sure that we were seeing the numbers properly. And this was validated. It's not news if you think about it carefully, right? You're producing mostly in Accra. You're not paying all the import duties that someone is paying to bring in the goods. And your transportation cost is much lower. If you put in all the ingredients, you should be able to price much cheaper than a foreign produce. But it's also news because, as a country, we've always lived with this truism, if you want to call it, that foreign goods are always more competitive. What we found here is that Ghanaian producers can actually be very competitive despite the extremely difficult operating environment. 73% of the categories made in Ghana goods were more competitive. And there's a bigger discussion we can have about this in terms of what this really, really means. If you are this competitive in pricing, why do you have only 18% of your products in the supermarkets? The next question, of course, will be branding. And again, packaging and branding, it's not always the best. We have a long way to go, and that's true. But what we also discovered that it's this what we call catch-up packaging. The quality of packaging, and I'm sure many of you may have noticed it, for made in Ghana products is beginning to improve substantially. And in fact, there are many products categories that if you go into the supermarkets today, you'll be shocked to discover that the Ghanaian quality of branding is actually better than the foreign branding in a few of the product categories. So there's superior pricing in majority of the product categories, and the packaging gap is closing. So what is it? Is it product quality? I would say that the differences in terms of product quality may be marginal. I mean, if the FDA certifies a product, and the supermarkets, I don't think, will accept inferior products onto their shelves. So all things equal, quality differentials must be very minimal. So what's really going on? Why do we have only 18%? So we need to have this conversation. How do we improve the situation? And I'm sure that in the breakout sessions, these are some of the things we can touch on. Now, this was a survey we did just to look at what's going on domestically. But at Confidants, we did another study that we call the Afro-Champions Index. We did a study of the 50 top African indigenous multinational companies that are doing business and expanding across the continent. So your likes of EcoBank, UBA, Dangote Group, MTN, ShopRite, these are all companies that originate from within the continent. What we found, and again very depressing, not a single Ghanaian company in the top African multinationals. But the shocking finding was that in the same study, where you didn't have any Ghanaian multinational amongst the top African multinationals, Ghana was the #2 destination for African multinationals. So we are the #2 favorite destination for other African multinationals trying to do business. But we're not in the list in terms of origin. So we top the list for destination. We're nowhere in the list for origin. Zambia beat us. Zambia was #1. But this again tells you it's a fundamental structural flaw. And there's a lot that determines this. And as I said initially, it's not just because our entrepreneurs are not hardworking or competitive. You have an extremely difficult operating environment. Extremely difficult operating environment. The only way we can tell whether we can build a Ghanaian Dangote goes beyond just the entrepreneurs. There's a lot from the operating environment and policy enablers that go into that. Okay. So, what do we do? And I know that Mr. Tinjesi would do justice to that question, but just based on the baseline that we've seen, I just want to share a few thoughts. And the first one is that the country has to get more competitive. There's no two ways about that. It has to happen. And I'll pick just 3-4 areas. The first one is cost of capital. If we don't deal with this issue once and for all as a country, we should forget about business competitiveness. If we don't deal with it, cost of capital has to come down. And I think as industry, we just need to come together and do something about it. So I personally think that next year's elections, we should set a challenge to the two political parties. We should pick a number and tell them to make a promise. and see who can get a cost of capital down to that number. And because we're a very religious country, we should pick a number that we can all remember. So I'll probably say 7, right? It's a number we can all remember. So let's challenge the two parties. They are going to issue their manifestos. Let's get them the 7% challenge. And let's see who can promise to get the interest rate and the cost of capital. And I don't mean the prime rate. I mean the average lending rate, down to 7%. The second one is energy, cost of energy. If we don't get the cost of energy down, we should forget about any manufacturing happening in this country. Because outside of labor cost, and now technology is increasingly replacing labor. So energy is going to be extremely, extremely important because a lot of the cost associated with technology also has to do with the cost of energy. And the cost of energy for business people in this country just doesn't make sense. Globally, if you want to be competitive in manufacturing, you should be selling energy to industry at no less than 5 cents per kilowatt hour. So again, let's use the same 7. Again, let's challenge the political parties as they issue their manifestos. Who can get a cost of energy to industry down to 7 cents per kilowatt hour? Let's set that challenge. The third one I want to talk about is the cost of renting and leasing office facilities in this country. It makes absolutely no sense that you have to pay 2 years advance. You lock up all your capital. And even though we say, well, it's a difficult challenge, not even in Nigeria. I mean, it's a very peculiar situation with Ghana. And I think, again, we should challenge the two political parties. It's a lot easier to enforce these rent controls in the office property market than in the residential sector. So let's leave the residential sector for a while. Let's start with the office property markets. Nobody should pay more than 3 months advance. So again, I say we should set a challenge as the manifestos are coming out next year. Let's see which political party can promise to enforce this so that entrepreneurs and businesses do not have to pay more than 3 months advance to rent an office property to do business. And there are many incentives we can use to do this, right? We can have another discussion about that. The second point I want to talk about is political competitiveness of industry itself. The way I see it, there appears to be a structural flaw in the industry lobby in this country. It seems to me that the import lobby is a bit too powerful than the local producer lobby. I stand to be corrected, but that's what I see. And some of that is a reflection of the fact that we're an import-dependent country, right? So they have more leverage by definition. But I think that the local producer groups need to up their political game. You can't just sit there and complain and expect that politicians and policymakers will simply pick up the job and do it. Because they also operate within an environment of political competition. So I think there's a lot more that local producer groups need to do. There's a lot more organized, structured political lobbying that has to go on. We need to correct that flaw in the political competitiveness of different industry stakeholders. The third one, and I noticed that we're using the word indigenous in the discussions today. What I want to emphasize is that local content is not the same as indigenous content. Because foreign content is a part of local content. If you have foreign businesses that are locally based, they are local businesses. So you can promote local content without promoting indigenous content. And if we really want to build local champions, indigenous companies, we need to do both. We need more local content incentives because it encourages the foreigners to come and base out of here and create jobs and bring technology, and it's good. But we need to disaggregate and also promote indigenous content because that's the harder part. The next one is I think we should pick more winners, right? In the last 20 years, the World Bank and the IMF have preached this ideology that says, don't pick winners because you end up picking cronies. There are ways to pick winners and grow them into champions. Nigeria picked a winner called Dangote, and he hasn't disappointed. I think what we've been doing is picking cronies. We should stop picking cronies and pick winners. We need to find the Ghanaian Dangote and support him and grow him into a Pan-African champion. It must be done. And in picking winners, it's not just at that big level. We can also pick it at the SME level. If you look at the supermarket research that we showed, the product trends tell you a lot about sectors where we have a lot of prospects. So you can pick just 10 out of the 23 products and decide that in the next 3-5 years, we want to increase the presence of those products in our supermarkets up by 50% each. And bring the supermarkets and the producers together. It shouldn't be an imposition on the supermarkets. Let's bring them together, win-win policies, government around the table. Let's see how we can set targets and do this. The last one I want to talk about is the culture, and what I like to call our cultural balance sheet. You can look at the culture of a country as a balance sheet. Your culture is either an asset or it's a liability. And you need to figure out what the net position is, because no culture is perfect. You always have pluses and minuses. But your net position should be an asset. Your culture should be an asset. Your culture should be a competitive asset. And as a people, no matter how well the government improves the operating environment, no matter how hard entrepreneurs and businesses work, if as a people, from a mindset point of view, our culture is not an enabler for competitiveness, we can have the best operating environment, we can have the greatest entrepreneurs, we're still not going to produce the champions. The economy is not going to be a major economy in emerging markets. So as a people, the task is not just on the government and entrepreneurs, and the cultural change is a complex issue, and it's not going to be achieved overnight. But some of what must be done at the level of businesses and entrepreneurs, in my opinion, is that we should have not just great entrepreneurs, we should also have cultural entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs and managers and business leaders who build not just great companies, but great company cultures. They raise the bar. And you do that and you create a contagion effect. And you become a role model, not just in terms of your business and the company you've built, it's also a culture within that company. There's a reason why everybody wants to work at Google in America. It's ranked every year as the greatest place to work. What's the greatest place to work in Ghana? So, that I think is ultimately the most important point, and that's what I'll leave. As a country, we need to look at our cultural balance sheet. We need to get to the point where our culture is not a liability. At the moment, I think to a large extent, our culture is a liability for business growth and business competitiveness. We need to get to the point where we transform our culture from becoming a liability and turn it into an asset for our competitiveness. Thank you.